Hello there, dear listeners. Ghost Planet Network has kindly sponsored this episode, so grab a hot chocolate, maybe a tea, and definitely something stronger as we pose a question. Would you like to be part of a paranormal content revolution? If so, get ready to grip your armchairs because Ghost Planet Network has entered its new era, and here at Haunted UK Podcast Towers, we are very much ready for it. I don't know about you, but I am fed up of not having anything interesting to watch in the evening. An endless scroll through the usual, only to hit upon nothing but the social media on my phone, with a heavy sense of boredom, dread, and a void right there on my shoulders. Sound hauntingly familiar? Well, fear no more, because Ghost Planet Network has got it covered. But that's not to say there's absolutely no fear, because the content is seriously terrifying. Ghost Planet Network launched in June 2023 and is available to stream on Roku TV via Roku Box and on all mobile devices. Since then, they've been growing steadily, reaching paranormal enthusiasts from all corners of the globe. And now, the network is about to take things to the next level, bringing you even more exclusive content, groundbreaking investigations, and spine-tingling live streams like never before. It's a paranormal content revolution, and Ghost Planet Network want you to be a part of it and join them on this thrilling journey, all from the comfort of your own home. For just £3 per month, you can access live streams and exclusive original pre-recorded series such as My Haunted Home, British Haunted Castles, and British Haunted Woodlands, and many more. For me, though, I'm especially looking forward to the live streams such as Demon Connections, where each week the Ghost Planet Network team investigate different demonic myths, inviting a new entity forward in a bold attempt to uncover the truth behind the name. Or Communicating with the Dead, live seances with 5 guests around the table, who will step forward from the spirit realm to speak. But what I'm really intrigued about is a live stream series called Portal. Oh my word, this, I'm told, is a never-before-attempted concept in paranormal broadcasting. Details are firmly under wraps, but let me tell you, it's worth the wait. Ghost Planet Network is now on subscription-only channel, but don't worry, access to all their exclusive live streams, series, and investigations will cost just £3 per month. That's less than the price of a coffee to unlock an entire world of chilling content. And for Haunted UK podcast listeners, the news just gets better. You can subscribe for just £1.50 per month for 12 months when you use the voucher code Haunted UK Podcast. Further details and links to the network are listed in this episode's show notes. So what are you waiting for? Dim the lights, grab that hot chocolate, maybe something stronger, and prepare for the future of paranormal television. Only on Ghost Planet Network. Welcome to Talk Haunt's Nick Pope, journalist and commentator, author and the go-to consultant on all things UFO. Whilst working for the Ministry of Defence between 1991 and 1994, you worked on the UFO desk, where your duties included investigating reports of UFO sightings, making you undoubtedly the real-life version of Fox Mulder. You have written many books on the subject, such as Encounter in Rendlesham Forest and the excellent Open Skies, Closed Minds, as well as a rather spooky The Uninvited. Marie has really been enjoying this one. You have appeared on countless iconic shows and documentaries, as well as appearing as a guest speaker at key UFO conferences. And recently, you've been touring with the TV show Ancient Aliens Live, thus confirming that you are the absolute authority on UFOs as a whole. And with that all said, we are absolutely delighted to have you on the show to talk haunts and UFOs with you.
Sure, thank you for having me.
So, Nick, I'm going to get this kicked off straight away by saying it is a real personal honour to have you on the show. I've been following you for absolutely decades with the books and all the interviews and documentaries that you've taken part in. Although we're called Haunted UK Podcast, we do get a lot of UFO stories from our listeners, and even some, we do get a number of actual alien abduction stories. But coming back to yourself, is the UFO phenomena something that you have always been interested for much of your life?
No, actually not at all. And people find that surprising. But until I was given this job on the so-called UFO desk, I really had no interest in the subject at all, and no knowledge about it. As a child, like most kids of my era, I'd watched the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I probably read Charles Berlitz's book, The Bermuda Triangle, which I think had a chapter on UFOs, and that was it. So I was just given this job and went in really with an open mind, which is, I think, the best way to have gone into that. But no, I never had an interest in it before I was actually doing it officially.
So when you worked on the UFO desk, what did an average day look like? And when a case did come in, what would be the process?
I know it's a horrible cliche, but there wasn't a typical day. It was very events led. Because I was the subject matter expert on that topic, if anything came up relating to that topic, I would have to basically take first run at it. And that could be anything from parliamentary business. For example, if an MP asked a question in Parliament, I would be the one who would have to draft the reply that the Secretary of State for Defence would send. And at the other end of the spectrum, if a school kid wrote in and said, we're doing a project on UFOs, can you send me some information? That would be me too. So it could, or somewhere in the middle, if the press office got in touch and said, hey, one of the national daily newspapers has asked some questions and we need to kind of respond. And again, I would be the one leading on that. But feeding into the second part of your question, the bread and butter of the job was, of course, the investigations. So the new cases that came in, and we got about 200 or 300 each year. And a lot of times people would phone up. We had, I know it sounds kind of bizarre and surreal, but a UFO hotline, which was basically my phone. And we had a standard form which we'd pretty much inherited from the Americans when they were running Project Blue Book. They used these standard forms to take down all the data, date and time of the sighting, direction, estimated height or angle of elevation, any sound, color, estimate of speed, shape, all those sorts of things. The meteorological conditions at the time, any prominent landmarks, that sort of thing. And then what I would do, I would speak to the witness, get all this information down, and then it was really a process of elimination. You knew historically the sort of things that people misidentify as UFOs. So we would try and correlate what we had with things that we knew about. So on our office wall, for example, we had a huge map of the UK, all the military bases, the military ranges and danger areas, exercise areas, the commercial flight paths, the locations where weather balloons were launched. We had the so-called NOTAMs, notices to airmen, anything unusual, whether it was like airships, hot air balloons, pyrotechnics, lasers, searchlights. Then we would speak to the radar experts, see if anything unusual was tracked. If we had photos or videos, we could go to the intelligence community imagery analysts. We would speak to the Royal Greenwich Observatory about bright stars and planets, meteor showers, satellites, that sort of thing. We would speak to the meteorological office, again, about weather balloons, any unusual weather conditions. And at the end of all that, 80% of the sightings we could explain with a high degree of confidence, 15% insufficient data, 5% unknown.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to circle back to this a little bit later on in the interview, but I just think I'm so glad that you actually went through all of those facets that you had to go through, bright stars in the sky and, meteorological events and things like that, because it doesn't always come across when somebody's researching, or, you've got a job like you had. The detail that you had to go into to eliminate all of these various things, it kind of gets glossed over. And I'm just so glad, Nick, that you've brought that up, because the level of detail that you must have had to go into to eliminate all of these things and come up with that 5% that, we just don't know. This could be, well, this is a UFO. Whether it's extraterrestrial or not is a different matter, but it is an unidentified flying object. It's just fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, the level of detail that you had to go into. If an alien did visit, or an invasion did occur in the UK, what would be the procedure if you were back on that desk? Obviously, people would panic, and I think that's something that COVID taught us. Countries got locked down, and businesses got locked down, and things like that. What kind of process did you have a process in the MOD's UFO desk for this?
Not really, because there were so many variables. I mean, kind of boiling it down almost to Hollywood, but where on the spectrum would it be? Would it be E.T. or Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Or would it be, War of the Worlds or
James Cameron's Aliens?
The first question, obviously, from the Prime Minister would be probably to the Chief of the Defence Staff, is there a threat? And our philosophy would have been right across the board, assume that there's a threat until you can be assured that there isn't.
Yeah.
It's better to approach it that way than the other way, and I'm sure everything will be fine, and then it goes south. But there is no alien invasion war plan. There is not even really a contingency plan for a more benign first contact. As I say, firstly, there are too many variables, but secondly, people just have a sort of mental block on it. Yeah. There's this kind of skeptical, bureaucratic mindset of it can't be, so it isn't, and therefore we won't bother. And I think that's a mistake, because wherever you are on that spectrum, there will be things that you could usefully do. So, for example, what about if we did have some sort of first contact scenario? Surely the logical first steps would be to cordon off the area for all sorts of reasons, but then to think, is there a potential biological hazard? And so to actually deploy some of the assets that you would use in case of a nuclear, chemical, or biological leak. And so it's interesting you mentioned COVID. And I'm actually one of the few people who have pointed out, as you've pointed out, that there is a read across here. Because for years, I heard people say, oh, yeah, we're ready for disclosure. We're ready. We'd be able to handle aliens. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. A global pandemic. We've had them before. We had contingency plans, and yet the world lost its collective mind for 2 years.
They did.
And if that happens for something that we can and had planned for, what on earth, pun intended, is going to happen if we have something extraterrestrial?
So do you think there would be mass panic? Because I think I would definitely panic.
I think there would be. Again, back to COVID. If people are going to panic about no toilet paper in the supermarket, or, oh my goodness, a 2-year-old can't keep a mask on in a plane, surprise, surprise. And if people are going to lose their minds over stuff like that and start screaming and panicking, yeah, absolutely. I think people very well might panic. But even if it comes, as it almost certainly would, with uncertainty, and it's fear of the unknown, that was what was behind a lot of the panic and hysteria with COVID. And with COVID, I'm not talking just about panic and hysteria from people on the streets. I'm talking about panic and hysteria from government in a situation where it should have been clear from about week one that only a very small kind of subset of the population were at serious risk in terms of health, i.e. the elderly, the immunocompromised, and the obese. And yet we had this kind of, oh my gosh, we're all going to die, everyone's at risk narrative, when clearly they weren't. So if we get that so spectacularly wrong for something, as I say, that we had contingency plans for, you throw in something like extraterrestrials, non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call this, and I think you can have all the plans in the world, but when the rubber hits the road, it's going to come kind of spectacularly off the rails.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with human beings at the end of the day, and I think there would also be panic from religious factions as well, simply because you are putting everything that anybody has, with a religious book or a religious view of the world, you're putting all of that in doubt. I mean, I'm not singling religion out, but that, just for starters, there would be mass panic there, I think. And you are right, there would be a huge amount of panic. Is there any chance you could just come back to the UK and become Prime Minister? Because you've really seemed to get your head screwed on. 1947, obviously, Roswell. 1980 was a big year for the UK as far as UFO events were concerned. And you know this very, very, very well, the Rendlesham Forest incident. What do you personally think happened at Rendlesham? I've heard this so many times, and again, I'll circle back to this a little bit later on. There's something else that I'd like to bring up with you. But the lighthouse theory, the Orford Ness Lighthouse, and oh my God, it really gets on my nerves when people keep bringing it up, because I've actually been there. I've been in the forest where this took place, and I've wandered around, and I just cannot see it. I cannot see it. But I know you wrote the book about it, Nick, but for the listeners, what did you personally think happened in Rendlesham?
Well, I can tell you what it wasn't. And it wasn't the lighthouse, obviously. The lighthouse, even at night, simply isn't visible from most of the places. And I've walked the ground with the witnesses. I have actually got boots on the ground, starting where they left the base, going out into the forest. And I've done this with Colonel Charles Holt, the deputy base commander. I've done it with some of the other witnesses too. So it wasn't the lighthouse. It wasn't a practical joke. It wasn't a test of the guard force using some sort of spooky holographic projection. But I can't tell you what it was. I mean, except it goes into that 5% category. It's unknown. I've heard all the different theories: extraterrestrials, time travelers from the future, something from another dimension. It's possible. I can't rule any of that out. I sometimes think with Rendlesham, as I think with some of the other 5%, what if it's something that we don't have words for? We're wonderful as humans at labeling things. So kind of going back to your point about religion, and you're absolutely right, that the religious, every aspect of our society would be deeply and profoundly impacted by first contact, disclosure, whatever you call it. But few fields would be more profoundly impacted than religion. And religion being a case in point, we put labels on things. So in days of old, things were probably angels and demons, gods and devils. Now it's maybe aliens and time travelers. But what if all these labels are wrong? And then going back to the folklore in a non-religious sense. So the secular version would be elves, dwarves, fairies. Humans have always, in our history and our stories, interacted with otherworldly beings, and humans have, since the dawn of time, seen strange things in the sky. But how we interpret these depends on our culture, our belief system, and the language that we have. We can only use the words that we have. So like I say, gods, devils, angels, demons, so the list goes on and on. My point is, what if all of those are wrong? What if these are just labels? And what if the truth about Rendlesham and some of the other 5% is something not only that we don't have words for, but something beyond our current level of comprehension, something we can't even really process? Like trying to explain quantum physics to chimpanzees.
No.
You can't do it, however hard you try. Maybe that is the phenomenon in relation to us.
I was going to ask you about that because in The Uninvited, I love how you draw parallels between the narrative of the abductees and the narrative used in folklore, particularly Celtic folklore and magic and fairy tales. And I'm just curious if you think that is evidence that our ancient ancestors were visited, or if that is just the pattern of human storytelling. I really thought it was such an insightful point because I never thought of that before or even seen it in that way, but I can really see it.
Sure, and I'm not the first person to have pointed that out. Researchers like Jacques Vallée have done a much deeper dive, and Eddie Bullard, I think, as well, and a number of others have done a real deep dive into these connections and have drawn parallels. For example, the folkloric tale of Rip Van Winkle, for example, falls asleep, visits this other realm, wakes up, finds that much more time has passed. I mean, this is exactly what the abductees report and label so-called missing time. It's the same thing, but viewed through a slightly different lens in terms of language and culture that comes from, say, a couple of hundred years having passed. So I think, there are obviously common stories that I mean, scholars, I think it was Joseph Campbell has kind of talked about how there are only 7 archetypal stories ever told. Things like rags to riches, the hero's journey. Yeah. So you could certainly put otherworldly visitation into that. It has elements of all these archetypal stories. On the other hand, there's no smoke without fire. And isn't it a more logical Occam's razor choice that the reason we have these stories is that our ancestors really did experience these things? And of course, that gets to the heart of what ancient astronaut theorists believe, i.e., that we were visited in our history by extraterrestrials who our ancestors misperceived as and then worshipped as gods. That there was communication, that they taught us the basics of civilization, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, law, and then moved on, and that we acquired some of their wisdom and built great monuments to commemorate these visits. And some people say, oh, doesn't that diminish human ingenuity? No. Everyone has had teachers. All of us have teachers, right? Whether those teachers are our parents or whether they're educators at school. So there's nothing demeaning about suggesting that humanity might have had teachers.
I love that idea.
And that's what shows like Ancient Aliens get into.
That, for me, that statement right there, that's kind of a eureka moment for me. That has literally just happened because I've said it myself. You're not giving the human race enough credit here. Aliens didn't come down and build the pyramids. We did it ourselves. But that is such a different take on that, Nick, because we still built the pyramids, but did we build the pyramids, to as a monument, as this artifact of worship to something that didn't come from here? That is a fantastic way of looking at it. And I've watched a lot of Ancient Aliens, but I've never heard that point made so well. So I really do appreciate that. That's that's kind of been a bit of a eureka moment for me, actually. That's
Yeah. I mean, ancient astronaut theorists, contrary to what the skeptics say, actually sort of, give huge credit to our ancestors for their accomplishments in doing these things. And when you look at structures like the pyramids, when you look at places like Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, Sacsayhuaman, you see, and when you look at, for example, the trilithons at Baalbek, these some of those stone blocks, which are up on the third level somehow, weigh 1,500 tons. We would struggle to do that today. I've spoken to structural engineers who would say, for something to move something like that and to incorporate it into the structure, you'd have to, from scratch, design a special crane to do it. And then that would be a job. And then you look at the precision of some of the stonemasonry at some of these sites like Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman. And you think, if we were doing this nowadays, we would use diamond tip drills, we would use high pressure hoses, we would cut these blocks with, and people say, oh yeah, these blocks were cut with tools, and then you drill down into it, pun intended, and some of the blocks at some of these Central and South American sites are made of things like grey andesite,
which is incredibly hard.
Very, very hard. And the only tools that they've found there are copper, bronze, and iron. You cannot cut grey andesite with those tools, because it's simple common sense that if the block is much harder than the tool, it can't be done. So there are. I don't have the answers to all this. I'm not an ancient astronaut theorist, but I know enough about it to say there are some really interesting questions. The more we probe into some of these ancient sites, the more questions we have.
I'd like to circle back to Rendlesham just quickly, because I loved this show, but I was very disappointed about the special. I don't know whether you could go all the way back to 1997 for Strange But True. And you were on a panel with Stanton Friedman and Timothy Good. Again, I've got a lot of time for Timothy Good. I think he's Above Top Secret is one of just my all-time favourite books. I think he was brilliant, Timothy Good. I so felt that the three of you were kind of railroaded in that show. And you weren't given a fair crack of the whip to explain what was quite obvious to me was going on. Again, I don't know whether it was extraterrestrial or something like that, but it was quite obvious to me that what was going on there wasn't an everyday occurrence. There was something very, very strange going on with witnesses who were trained to recognise anomalies, and they were trained to key into detail. These were people that knew what they were talking about. I just wondered what that felt like when the camera was on the three of you and you were kind of being railroaded a little bit. That was all. It fascinated me.
Well, I think a couple of the skeptics made points which were, if not dishonest, certainly misleading, and I think they knew it. But I didn't feel railroaded. And actually, I felt, look, let the data speak for themselves. Yeah. And you know what? I don't know if you remember, but during the show, they had an open phone line.
Yeah, they did.
And they were taking a public vote. We won I think, either 91 or 92%. So the public, irrespective of how it was framed on the show, the public vote was massively in our favor, supporting the high strangeness interpretation of Rendlesham Forest and of the phenomenon more generally. So, simply put, we won.
Yeah.
You did. I watched it earlier today because I was talking to Steve about it yesterday, and it was a brilliant debate.
Yeah. And of course, at the time, I was still I was not on the UFO desk, but I was still working for the Ministry of Defence. So I had to be very careful what I said. So in one sense, I kind of pulled my punches a little bit. I couldn't quite play my strongest hand because there were some things that the Ministry of Defence really had not yet released on the subject. So I was kind of having to fight with one hand tied behind my back. But like I say, without wanting to sound too boastful, we kind of wiped the floor with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was. What struck me with it as well was the. I don't think people gave enough credit to your particular panel, especially. Well, the way it came across when it was being filmed, especially, again, I don't think many people knew who Stanton Friedman was. And, he'd worked in security for many, many years for the US government. So, he was a fantastic panelist, such as yourself and Timothy Good, but so interesting about you having to, as you say, pull your punches because you were still under that blanket of the Ministry of Defence, and you had to watch what you were saying. I think it was even brought up in Parliament, wasn't it? That case back when it happened.
Yes, very much so. There have been a number of questions asked in Parliament about the Rendlesham Forest incident over the years, and just to kind of show the difficult position that I was in, like you mentioned right at the beginning when we asked about the typical day, and I said that I would be the one having to draft the answers. Sad to say, I had to, when I was doing that job, I was the one who had to draft the reply saying effectively, this was looked at, but we didn't consider it to be of any defense significance. And as I was drafting this, it was a sort of piece of Orwellian double thing. Because I was drafting it to say that. And of course, I knew. I was like, well, hang on. How can it not be of defense significance when an unknown object lands next to two very strategically important military bases at a time of considerable international tension? I mean, if people remember 1980, the Polish trade union Solidarity and what the Soviets were saying that they might do if the Polish regime was unable to keep the unions in check. They basically said to Poland, the kind of puppet government there, they said, if you can't sort this out, we'll come in and do it for you. Well, that would have been World War III.
Yeah. A very, very, very delicate time. Yeah, which you could have seen could have played on people's minds. You could have you could have seen that, but it's not just Rendlesham, is it? There are far more. There are many, many more cases out there that are incredibly convincing. Again, not to just strictly say that they are extraterrestrial, but they are UFOs. We can't go any further than unidentified flying objects, but that is what they are. And we have no answers for them, whether they are technology from Area 51, which is being flown by the US government, which is being, experimental aircraft. We have no idea. But we interviewed a chap called Neil Armstrong. Excuse the pun, Nick, but that's his real name. It wasn't the guy that landed on the moon,
Neil
obviously.
Armstrong.
No. And he even said about his friend who was a commercial airline pilot, or still is a commercial airline pilot, that he said, it's just not unusual for commercial airline pilots to literally be seeing things on a very, very, very regular basis. But they're not really encouraged to report them because of, endangering their position in their job, really. And that's such a shame that still rings true even today.
Yes, there is still stigma, particularly in the UK, less so in the United States, where I've actually lived now since 2012. And of course, right now, we've got congressional engagement on this subject. Again, I don't know how much visibility Brits have of this, but the new administration here a few weeks ago set up a body called the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets, which is going back through things like the JFK assassination.
Right, okay.
But they will also be looking at UFOs. And so there's less stigma in the US. And now, of course, the Pentagon does have a unit set up, again, doing this officially.
Really?
And military and commercial pilots, as you say, they see these things on a regular basis. They are tracked on radar.
Yeah.
They are also filmed on forward-looking infrared cameras mounted on jet aircraft and other surveillance platforms. And from time to time, they show up on satellite imagery, although, of course, the levels of classification about the capabilities of our satellites means that people aren't saying much about that in public.
Yeah.
But there have been classified briefings in the United States Congress, as well as open public hearings with some of the whistleblowers. So things are changing, and this subject, certainly in the US, is transitioning from fringe to mainstream in a way that I've not seen before.
I mean, I think that then comes back and has an effect on that balance, Nick, of what we were talking about earlier, of how far do you go? You know, if you're part of this group who are going back through these documents and back through these cases, how far do you go, and what do you reveal where it does become or could become a threat to national security? It's a very delicate balance, I would think.
Yes, you never want to disclose anything that would reveal the capabilities of any of our military systems, like our radar. You never want to release anything that would compromise methods and sources by which we gather intelligence. And you absolutely, if some of these rumors, well, they're more than rumors because they've been testified under oath to the US Congress. But if the testimony that we're now hearing about legacy intelligence community programs looking at crash retrievals and reverse engineering, if that's true, what you absolutely never want to do is to declassify any technical details that an adversary could then weaponize.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I mean about that balance. It's a very, very delicate balance.
Nick, I would love to circle back to alien encounters and abduction. I thoroughly enjoyed The Uninvited, as you know, which is your book on alien contact and abductions. And in it, you talk about some really fascinating cases that you personally have looked into, and they really do bend your mind. I was listening to it on the way to work, and I was questioning my reality big time. In your experience, what does a textbook alien abduction involve? And do you think they're becoming more frequent?
I'm not sure if they're becoming more frequent, and some people say they're becoming less frequent, though I think the fact that from much of the 90s, a lot of the work on this was done by three kind of big names, John Mack, Bud Hopkins, and David Jacobs. Of those three, John Mack and Bud Hopkins have now died, and Dave Jacobs has pretty much retired from the field. He's pretty elderly, and so that's and there are other people who are involved. Barbara Lamb, but she's quite old now, and I'm not sure she's as active as she used to be. Dolores Cannon used to be involved. She passed away some years ago. So some of it is that the kind of spokespeople that were often most vocal on this are either no longer with us or no longer active in the field. But I think there is this kind of typical, almost like a blueprint for it. People will be in their cars or beds. They will sometimes see a UFO through the window. And then there'll be this sort of feeling of disorientation, a sense of being drawn up through a beam of light, taken out of your room or out of your car into a vehicle, placed on your back on a table or a low platform of some sort, seeing entities, often these so-called little greys, 3.5 feet tall, disproportionately large, black, almond-shaped eyes. And then some sort of quasi-medical procedure, examination takes place. Sometimes there's communication, but usually it's just platitudes like, don't worry, this won't hurt, or this is for your own good, or something like that. And then again, a feeling of disorientation. And there you are back in your car or back in your room. And if you're in a car, for example, and you get back home, you will find that there is a period of so-called missing time, that a journey that you're very familiar with, that you do every day, you know exactly how long it takes. And suddenly, well, wow, why has my 20-minute journey, why is my watch now reading, like an hour and 20 minutes has passed? So that's the typical blueprint for it. That being said, as you'll know, Marie, from like particularly the second half of the book, I made a point of highlighting some cases that didn't fit that mold. And one thing that I've noticed is that although there are often these common features, some of the most intriguing cases are so surreal and bizarre and abstract that it's kind of like challenging your view of reality itself. And when people, we can, of course, only look at this from a sort of anthropocentric viewpoint because we have none other. But people don't really understand, can't conceptualize what something truly alien might be like. If you look at differences in language and culture between, say, someone from England and someone from, I don't know, China or from Sudan, South Sudan, there are huge linguistic and cultural differences. And yet, if you look at those and say, well, that's just human variation, and on a scale of 1 to 100, that's within 1 point. Now try and imagine something 100 or 1,000 degrees separated, and how truly bizarre and surreal interacting with an intelligence like that might be, particularly if it's an intelligence a billion years ahead of us, which, given the age of the universe, is not surprising. How do ants perceive human beings, and how does an insect perceive a futuristic human city as it flies in from the countryside for the first time? I don't know. None of us knows, but kind of that's maybe the frame of reference that we should think about when looking at how we might interact with a non-human intelligence. And of course, a non-human intelligence that might not be biological, even though it might look it. It might be AI.
And with that, we shall bring this interview to a close. Nick, we cannot thank you enough for coming on and giving us your time. Good luck with anything that you've got going on in the future with the live tour with Ancient Aliens and things. And we would love to have you back on the show when you've got some more free time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Nick. Take care.
Now, it's usually here that you're listening to the end theme music and thinking about what to do next. That may involve walking the dog, building a full-size replica of Westminster Abbey from matchsticks, or taking up a new hobby, such as learning to unicycle whilst playing bagpipes. But what if I told you that this wasn't the end of the episode? You see, our guest has been incredibly kind enough to answer a few more questions. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
My 9-year-old son was really excited that you're coming on. He doesn't really like ghosts or the supernatural, but he's very interested in space and the idea of aliens because he thinks they're a dead cert. But we were looking at the recent news story of the James Webb Telescope detecting signs of the gas on the planet, is it K2-18b? And he wants to know if this is a sign of intelligent life and how they would determine this from this gas. And I want to know if you're excited about this.
I'm very excited about it, yes, because it really does seem to be the strongest evidence yet for the existence of alien life, because the organic molecules that have been discovered, we know of no process other than life that gives rise to them. So there's nothing on Earth that, say, that's geological that would give rise to them. So it does seem to be very strong evidence of life. That being said, it is almost certainly evidence of microbial life. This K218b is essentially a water world. So, and it's very hard, not least because of things like fire and things. It's very hard to get a civilization going on a water world. So assuming this is life, it is almost certainly microbial life. So microorganisms in an ocean, or simple life of some sort, and not a civilization. So this is why what they've detected is called a biosignature. So it seems to indicate the presence of biological life. The really exciting thing that James Webb may well discover is a so-called technosignature. And that would be slightly different. And that, for example, might be different kind of molecules, but something like CFCs. Now, CFCs on Earth kind of come out of, it's pollution, it's factories, it's an industrial society. So there's two different things that they're looking for. One is life, but two is complex life that has evolved into a civilization like ours. And we're not quite there yet. We haven't really got a strong candidate for a technosignature, but I wouldn't be surprised if within a year or two we didn't find that as well. So it's a great question. And I would urge your son to keep watching these news stories and keep following on social media the James Webb Space Telescope, and keep an eye on BBC Science and sites like that, because there's just so many amazing things happening right now.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Your son will love that, Marie.
Oh, he would love it. I'd be so happy. Yeah. You're up there with Harry Kane.
Oh, right. Oh, well.
He absolutely loves space. And I was telling him I was talking to you today, and he was just like, please ask him about that planet and the gas.
Well, it's a great question. And yeah, I'm very excited about it. Like I say, it almost certainly is life. We'll probably get confirmation of that in the next few months. Like I say, probably microbial life. But hey, look, if
it's life,
if we find, and I know it sounds like a huge distance, and it is, but in galactic terms, and let alone in kind of universal terms, it is right on our doorstep. If it turns out that there's life on a planet around a star that's really, in the terms of the size of the universe, so close to us, the logical implication is that the universe will be teeming with life, and this is hugely exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Again, you've only got to look at, I think it's the Drake equation, and that's years old now. But the prediction of how many planets could be out there that could support life, whatever that life is. Yeah, you've only got to look at the Drake equation. I'd like to come back to another really prominent case for me, which I've always found fascinating. And that's the case of flight JAL 1628, which was the cargo airliner that encountered, a number of unidentified flying objects. The guy that I really found interesting, the pilot I obviously found interesting because he did put a lot of detail into this kind of, into his description of the whole incident. But it was a chap called John Callahan. Whether you've met him, I'm assuming that you may have actually met him. Yeah,
I have. Yeah.
He fascinated me, especially when these shady government representatives suddenly appear and then take all the radar data away and literally say, we weren't here, you didn't see us, and you are to not talk about this incident ever again. What is your view on that, especially since you met John Callahan as well? Do you find him a very credible witness? Because I would assume he was, with the position that he held in the FAA.
Yes, he's a real straight shooter.
Yeah.
He never once added to his story. I mean, he just said, this is what happened. If he was some sort of fantasist, I'm sure it would have had all sorts of bells and whistles. But no, it was simply that he had the data, the radar data, some other data on this case, and some people from an unnamed agency, but clearly they had access all areas passes, basically, as you say, came in, took possession of the material, and that was pretty much it. We know, not least from people like Jay Stratton, who headed up the UAP task force, which was the body before the current Pentagon unit that had the lead on this in the US government, that people in all sorts of parts of the US government, the military and the intelligence community were involved with this subject. So we can speculate about who those individuals might have been. And the most popular theory is CIA, but we don't really know that for sure. And so, it's a fascinating case. They saw something. Now, again, some skeptics will say, well, maybe it was some secret prototype aircraft.
Yeah.
We've always got a pretty good idea through intelligence sources where the cutting edge of our technology is.
Yeah.
And in one sense, if this had been a secret prototype aircraft, all the guys would have had to have said is, don't worry, this is one of ours. And then, please don't talk about it because you compromise national security. And John Callahan would have said nothing. But that's not what they said. So that's why, when you said earlier, and I meant to circle back on this, but when you said, we don't know whether some of this stuff could be secret prototype aircraft or drones. Actually, when you're inside government doing this, we've got a pretty good idea. We know what we've got.
Wow.
We know through intelligence gathering what adversaries like Russia and China have got. Even if you're not read onto a specific program, which you wouldn't be without the need to know, you pretty much have a good idea of where the line is. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do, which is why, going back to things being unidentified, it's never quite enough to say that something's unidentified. All sorts of things are unidentified. What you really need it to do is it needs to be unidentified and anomalous. In other words, it needs to demonstrate speeds, maneuvers, accelerations, or other characteristics that we simply can't do. That's orders of magnitude above and beyond anything that we've got.
Yeah, I think one of the best windows into the world of that kind of phenomena has got to be Area 51, which brings me on to, which I'll quickly go through because I know that you need to get away. Bob Lazar. I wrote a 3-part episode about, not just about Bob Lazar, but about Area 51 and Operation Oxcart and how the U-2 was still flying, but they were, experimenting with Oxcart as the next generation spy plane while all of this was going on. How they managed to get all the titanium literally out of Russia, setting up all of these shadow companies to buy this titanium material in to make these aircraft. What's your view on Bob Lazar? Because even at the end of that 3-part series that I wrote, I was still on the fence. I still could not come down off the fence and go either way. There's just something about him. I just don't know what it was, but something about him. I'd be fascinated to know your view on him.
Well, earlier you mentioned Stanton Friedman, and Stanton, of course, was a nuclear physicist.
Yeah.
Stanton Friedman did a real deep dive into the Bob Lazar story. And he said, look, to me...
I don't think he was convinced.
Yeah. He said, this doesn't pass the smell test. And I knew Stan very well. And Stan would have loved this to have been true, but he was always honest enough to not just endorse something because he wanted it to be true. If something didn't pass the smell test, Stan was a straight shooter too, and he would tell you, and he said this guy, the story doesn't add up.
Yeah. That's
not to say that, again, there's no smoke without fire. So maybe elements of the story are true, element 115, Elements of the story may be true, but quite a lot of the backstory about, for example, him having studied at MIT, frankly, that seems to be false.
Yeah, they couldn't. I don't think they could find anything regarding his education at MIT.
No.
I think element 115 as well was. I think it's still pretty useless at the moment. They can't. I think it was discovered in Russia, actually.
It was discovered in Russia, but like all those heavy elements,
yeah,
here on Earth, it's only stable for nanoseconds before it breaks down.
Yeah.
So the idea that it would be used as fuel, it seems kind of far-fetched.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. But like I say, if Stanton Friedman was not convinced as a nuclear physicist, knowing what he was talking about, then that to me is a pretty good indication that there are, at the very least, some fairly big problems with Bob Lazar's story.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. We always ask this of all of our guests as we draw interviews to a close. Do you have, for our patrons, a recommendation of a favourite book or a favourite film that either is paranormal or supernatural or of the abduction genre or alien, the UFO genre? Do you have a favourite you could give us?
I'll just name check a few things. Leslie Kane's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots and Government Officials Go on the Record, is a really good introduction to this subject. I would also recommend Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, and watch out, hopefully later this year, for Jay Stratton's book, which does not yet, so far as I know, have a title. So that would be books. Films, I'd say go and watch two of the most thoughtful pieces of sci-fi that deal with this issue, Contact and Arrival.
Oh, brilliant films, yeah.
Contact's a great film.
Yeah, so those are my recommendations. But let me just tell you a couple of quick ghost stories.
Oh, please.
Oh, yes. Okay. Right. Okay.
When I was working in Ministry of Defence main building is really modern in Whitehall, but I don't know if you know, it's built on the site of the old Whitehall Palace. And so if you go down a couple of levels, you hit Henry VIII's old wine cellar. So there is literally this medieval structure in the basement of Ministry of Defence main building. Once a year, English Heritage get in there and they lead a tour. I think the waiting list is huge. But if anyone has any friends in the Ministry of Defence who can sign them in for a social function, always ask to see the Henry VIII wine cellar.
Wow.
And I will tell you that some of the tough old Ministry of Defence, MOD Guard service, a lot of whom are retired army, guys in their 50s, no nonsense. A lot of them have seen ghosts down there.
Really?
Wow.
So literally walking through the walls, things like that. Also, one day, the Ministry of Defence House magazine, Focus, they ran a letter from somebody who'd been he'd been on guard patrol at RAF Ely, I think.
Yeah.
And had told of how he'd seen an elderly woman go into the church that's on the military base.
Yeah.
There is only one entrance to the church. And he went up and thought, who is this elderly lady? He went into the one entrance.
Yeah.
And yet there was no one in the building. And the editor ran this letter telling this story and finished up by saying, has anyone else got any stories about ghosts on military bases or government buildings?
Yeah.
They had the biggest post bag in living memory and some really spooky stories. So, and I wrote up a little article on this. You can probably find it if you search for sort of, I think it was called Military Ghosts.
Okay.
So if you search on Military Ghosts, Nick Pope, Henry VIII wine cellar, RAF Ely, you'll find a few little bits and pieces. I thought that might appeal. I know we're discussing UFOs.
Oh, definitely.
But that might appeal to you and some of your other watchers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We get a lot of that, don't we, Marie? We get a lot of that about military bases, a hell of a lot of tales about military bases. Funnily enough, that revolve around time slips.
I was just going to say, do you think that your work in the field of UFOs and abductions has changed your view of the paranormal as well? Do you think that it's opened you up to being more of a believer, or do you see them as separate things anyway?
No, I think it might all go back to that point about labels and whether we have even the mental capacity to really understand what we're dealing with. And it may be that some of these phenomena are linked. I mean, so yeah, I've come across some interesting time slip cases. I have come across, military ghosts. And I think, yeah, doing the UFO job has made me more open-minded about that. And it's made me wonder whether, in one sense, whether the phrase paranormal is almost a mislabeling. Maybe it is normal, but just like our understanding of the laws of physics constantly changes. Maybe our understanding of the universe and what's possible and what isn't, that changes too. I mean, a few years ago, we would have, talk of other dimensions and things, we would have dismissed as science fiction. And now theoretical physicists like Michio Kaku that look at things like string theory say you actually need the existence of these hidden dimensions for the string theory equations to hang together. So there are just so many things that we don't understand, and maybe things that we currently label paranormal, whether they're UFOs, ghosts, time slips, whatever they are, maybe that's all part of reality that we don't yet currently understand.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, that brings us to our last question before we wrap this interview up. And please be as brief or as detailed as you like with this one. We always ask our guests, what truly scares you in life?
I'm not sure anything really scares me, because I think I tend to be more excited. I mean, I would love to see a ghost. I guess the thing that scares me is, what if I'm wrong? And what if none of this is true? What if it's all just some horrendous, what if it's all just misidentification and delusion and tricks of the brain and the chemistry in our brains? Maybe that would scare me, because I like the idea of there being more to discover. So the scary thing would be, no, there isn't. That's it. That would be scary to me.
Yeah, that is scary. Before we do let you go, Nick, do you, apart from the Ancient Aliens tour that you're on, do you have anything else lined up for the year that...
I've just had a film that I made has just come out, and it's called Alien Awakening.
Okay.
That should be on Amazon. There's another one which is coming out in a few weeks called Aliens from the Abyss, the dark side of the UFO phenomenon.
Right.
So if people like it a little bit scary and dark side, watch out for that one, Aliens from the Abyss. I'm filming, just wrapping up actually, the new season of Ancient Aliens, the TV show. So new episodes, certainly in the US, will be coming out in August.
Yeah.
Not sure when everything airs in the UK. And yeah, the Ancient Aliens tour, live tour continues. That's a 90-minute stage show based on the TV show. So at the moment, it's myself as moderator, Giorgio Tsoukalos, William Henry, and Jason Martell. And we go around from city to city, and we put on a live show each evening, and people can come to that and then come and meet us and grab a photo with us after the show.
That's brilliant, Nick. Is there a website where we can find the dates for the shows at all? ancientaliensLiveTour.com. Fantastic. We cannot thank you enough for this, Nick. Seriously, we cannot thank you enough. I mean, this has been an amazing interview for me personally. As I say, I've followed you for many, many, many years, and to actually have the chance to have these conversations and you to answer these questions, it's been fantastic. I can't thank you enough. I think you've enjoyed it as well, Marie.
Oh, I've absolutely loved it. Thank you. And thank you for your work as well.
Well, thanks. It's great Great to chat to you both. And please, Marie, thank your son for such an interesting and very timely question.
I will let him know. He will love that.
Nick, thank you. Thank you so much. And please take care. And if you've got time at some point in the future, we would definitely love to have you back.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, Nick.